I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Mandy Morris, and we're going to be talking about navigating mental health in high-level leadership. Mental health is something that's talked about an awful lot nowadays, but it doesn't tend to be talked about from a leadership perspective, especially when we're talking about high-level leadership, high-performance teams, people who are leaders in, who are, we've got leaders and leaders. So we're going to talk about that today. So, Mandy, where can people find you?
Hi, Jim. Thanks. And thank you for having me on. I really looking forward to this conversation and thank you for the intro. Yeah, people can find me at therapistmandy.com. That has all of my social media handles on that: LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. So that's the easiest way for people to get in touch with me.
So, Mandy, you said something to me when we did our preparation call, which I wrote down, which I really liked, which is you cannot check your baggage at the door when you go to work. Isn't that true?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is very well. Fortunately and unfortunately, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, that's true.
So in terms of mental health impacts everybody from a leadership perspective. What is it that as leaders we can be doing around mental health? Because I guess first thing is probably to admit that there is we may have some mental health issues in some shape or form.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So many things I could say about that, but I think one of the main ones is like what you said, mental health affects everybody, and leaders who don't pay attention to their own mental and emotional well-being and who don't have their own way of doing self-care around that or getting help around that, what you model as a leader is going to be what trickles down into everything else. And a lot of leaders say they have open door policy, or they'll be there if you ever need something, but maybe haven't necessarily made themselves the most approachable. Or what I've come to find that, especially in corporate companies or people in a leadership team or whatever, it's kind of a bad word. I've started doing executive coaching for a couple of years now, and as soon as one of them finds out I'm a therapist, it's like, oh gosh, oh no, I don't need therapy. There's nothing wrong with me, even though I'm doing coaching with them. But either way, it shouldn't matter, right? And I've had countless people be like, well, if they know you're a therapist, they're going to be worried that they think that there's something wrong with them. It's like, well, is there something wrong? And so I think as a whole, especially in larger organizations, people just get lost in the bottom line and what their revenue is. And reality is and a lot of research is coming out now that what used to be the soft skills are now the hard skills, and work with very successful individuals who their intellect got into a certain place, their mind, their intelligence, cognitively, but that will only go so far if you don't have good emotional intelligence and mental well-being. And the word mental health, I don't know if we need to start calling it mental fitness or mental and emotional well-being or whatever it may be, because I feel like that's become such a buzzword over the last decade or so that when people hear that word, it's either like shut down or glazed over. And
it's
there's
become
a lot of work to be done around
that, isn't it? Or authentic or something like that, where people you just don't listen to it.
Right. Well, I think there's a few things. There's the, people struggling to admit that there's even a problem. And I want to make it clear that just because someone, gets coaching to better themselves or gets therapy or whatever it may be, that in and of itself, the ability to ask for help Even if it's just to grow. You don't have to have this huge crisis or problem to go and get a therapist or get a coach. One of my taglines, if you will, doing my executive coaching is that I help make the best better.
Yeah.
And and a lot of what I do is very similar to what I do in therapy, because it's all about the person's psychology, their own brain psychology and their experiences. And to your point, when you opened this conversation up, is that you can't check your baggage at the door. 90 to 95% of our brain is subconscious long-term memory. What you and I are doing right here, right now, Tim, and anyone else joining us, this is 5% of our brain. And so, it makes you wonder what's really running the show. And if people are not willing to take a look at their own inner world, then that's just going to get projected, the good, the bad, and the ugly, onto other people and onto the way in which they lead and the capacity they have to have the most effective and efficient type of leadership. So yeah, it's a big deal for sure.
Because I think, one of the things about life today is that there's so many things going on, isn't there?
Right.
There's the football match you got to go to, or the
Mhm.
the baseball, or the
Yeah.
I know I've got elderly parents,
Yeah.
and all of these things provide a pressure onto you, and
Mhm.
I think there's a realization from COVID was that we're actually bringing all those things to work as well,
Yeah. Yep.
and that applies a pressure not
Mhm.
just onto the fact that we've got to do the quarterly number or whatever it is that's driving us at work,
Right.
and all of those things have an impact, don't they?
They do. They absolutely do. I think of it this way. Let's say let's say you have a kid, and it's time to go to school, right? And your son, daughter, whoever is like, Dad, uh, I don't feel good. I don't feel confident. I feel like no one likes me. I've been anxious. Blah, 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 all these things that are related to the person's, your kid's own mental and emotional well-being. And it's like, okay, well, we'll talk about it after school. The kid's sitting in school, not caring at all about what he's learning in social studies or language arts or the math, because thinking about whatever is going on internally. And so same thing as adults. If we don't pay attention and have plans in place and support in place for ourselves, but then also in positions of leadership for those you serve, because leadership is in service to your employees and to your product or your service or what you do, then productivity is going to go down for yourself and for everybody. Just like the example of having a kid and not being able to pay attention to, what the heck's happening in social studies class because he wanted to talk about how anxious he's been all day or whatever it may be.
But
So yeah.
and I think one of the things is that, as as a leader myself, I want to be the best I can be,
Right.
and I want to be able to come to work every day and to be the best I can be. And
Mhm.
I'm not always the best, because we have good days and bad days,
Mhm.
and there may be things that we have to deal with that we don't want to and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is that it's not like these are everyday things. It's not like there's a problem.
Right.
The fact that we have to deal, and sometimes it's really useful to ask someone, just as we may ask a colleague or our significant partner or something like that.
Mhm.
It's always useful to have someone to talk to,
Mhm.
where you can say, well, what about this? What would you do in this situation?
Right. Right. Well, yeah, for sure. And I think part of that is, two, is recognizing, well, so many people in leadership see um, or view, unfortunately, um, you know like reaching out for mental health, that's a form of weakness for a lot of people, and that's just old stigma. I think it's gotten a lot better, but yeah, to your point, exactly, that people in general, um, they're going to be affected by what all is going on, and that comes from their life experiences and things that they may not even know they have blind spots around. But I'll tell you what, when I was doing I was a guest speaker in an executive men's mastermind group, and I went through a list of self-sabotaging behaviors in leadership. And there's about 10 to 15 of them, probably about 18 or 20 men on the call. And these are all very successful, make millions of dollars a year. And all of them could relate to at least 80% of those self-sabotaging behaviors. And all of them relate to at least 8 or 10 out of those 15. And so it just goes to show that even when you are successful, that doesn't mean you're not experiencing things that are going to lead to mental health issues. And it could be something as simple, and it's not really that simple, but as simple as burnout. Most people in positions of leadership are high functioning in their anxiety or high functioning depression. And most of the time that we don't pay attention to our stress levels, and especially with leaders who feel the need to have it all together because of the position that they're in, that's the quickest way to lead to burnout for yourself and for other people.
So Peter Llewellyn's made a comment. It doesn't fit all on there, so I'm going to read it off there. Think that mental health is associated with mental illness, unlike physical health, which is usually not automatically associated with physical illness, other than to try and prevent it. Or maybe the phrase mental fitness or brain health may imply strong mind and be associated with keeping your mind turned up. Probably never catch on. Well, remember where you heard it first, Peter.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, case in point, that people don't want to use that word because of the association. And so the more people talk about this, and the more it becomes a part of normal conversation, and the more I can ask you, Tim, hey, how are you feeling today? And you not say, okay, I'm fine, doing good, and give give a as genuine answer as you can, but having those core people in your life where you can be honest and be real with, because let's face it, in general, but specifically for the topic we're talking about in leadership, that can become a very lonely place really quickly. And
because leadership is lonely. I remember when I ran my first sales meeting, whenever anybody else was running the sales meeting, we'd all call each other up afterwards. And then I ran my first sales meeting, and the phone never rang.
Yeah.
And I suddenly realized I had a 2-hour drive home, and normally I would have filled it with conversation and stuff. And I had 2 hours of silence on the way home. It was a lonely place.
Yeah. Very lonely. Yeah. Well, and there's this high level of responsibility and a need for a lot of people to maintain a certain image in front of their team or their employees. And that pressure that maybe no one else is even putting on you, but you're putting on yourself, is creating it's creating ceilings that you can't get through unless you're willing to take a look at how you're mentally and emotionally doing. And two, wanted to clarify as well, some people think cognition, so thinking and intellect and mental mentality are the same thing. And just like with physical fitness, you are strengthening muscles and building healthy physical well-being. Your brain's another organ like the rest of the organs in your body, and it needs assessing your own psychology and way of thinking with professional help and or the support of others is a imperative role in optimizing how well you perform.
So we've had a message from Veronica. I assume that she's a friend of yours. She says, hola.
Hi, Veronica. Yes. Yeah. She's wonderful and a good soul and a good heart.
She's also said, good day.
Buenos dias.
Buenos dias. What about having a leadership DNA and having an operating system? How is that built up?
Yeah, so I created this program called Leadership DNA. And what I do is I take individuals through this process where we look at what your operating system is. And what I mean by your operating system is the way in which you make decisions, the way in which you see yourself, others in the world, and really looking at when you're at your worst or when you're triggered, what is it that you're operating out of? Because, like you said, we all have good and bad days. And whether we like it or not, our own journey and our experiences have affected the way that we are for good, and sometimes for maladaptive or in unhealthy ways. So we look at what you operate out of and see if there's any limiting or negative beliefs you carry about yourself. And then what really is the way in which you want to be able to operate. And we look at times when you feel like you're in your flow state your most, that you're operating out of a place of confidence and peace and less internal struggle. And how do you make the switch from that old operating system to the software update, if you will, of your mind, and leading yourself, your business, others, even how you are at home, out of that belief. And so, for instance, instead of a lot of people in positions of leadership fear failure, right? And a lot of times that comes from either pressure put on self or previous experiences of failure. And we don't realize that that's in the subconscious. And so for some people, when that belief exists, whether they see it there or not, it could be a blind spot, will make decisions that are fear-based instead of out of confidence and clarity and all of that, which can lead to quick decisions or decisions that may lessen your own anxiety in the moment, but maybe aren't really in the long-term best interest of yourself and the company. And
And
so
do you have any examples of that, Mandy, at all?
yeah. So an example of that would be, so
Obviously, no
entrepreneur.
names.
Yeah, no names. Yeah, an entrepreneur who has been in business for at least 10 years, who reached out and was like, my revenue hasn't increased in the past 10 years, and I've run my own business and I don't know what to do. I'm stuck, and all this stuff. And so when I walked this client through, where they're getting stuck, took them through a process of really assessing what is the way in which they operate in all aspects of their company. But so we do that, but then we walk through their life's experiences. And way back early on, there was an experience of this client and his father, trying to teach him to work on the car in the garage. And his dad got so mad because he wasn't doing it right, and it was a memory that still sticks out in his mind. Well, felt like he was a failure and a disappointment to his dad. But when beliefs like that get formed and they don't get processed, and healthy connections of the mind aren't made, then those experiences will continue to show up in other experiences. And so when that's there and it's not been dealt with, any perceived maybe setback or sale that wasn't made or revenue that wasn't increased, it's going to go back to this feeling of I'm a failure. And our brain can't operate out of contradicting beliefs. So you can't have a belief, I'm a failure, and I'm very successful. They both can't exist. And our brain will find evidence for whatever it is you're believing, consciously or subconsciously. And when that happens, people don't see things that are actually there that can help them get past certain points because operating out of this belief. So once we recognize that was there, and that actually was a feeling that would come up, which kept my client from setting boundaries with his clients, from getting the credit cards on file, from really being able to do and be assertive in the way things that needed to be done because of fear of it not working out. But then that backfired. So it's become self-sabotaging, right?
Yeah.
So now we look at when are times when you've been the proudest of yourself and when you felt your best. And from there, we break it down. How do you know when you're starting to slide back into an old operating system of that fear of I'm a failure? And what does, I have value and I have success, and whatever it is that healthy and more adaptive belief is that we're going to operate out of, how do we make decisions and think as that person versus the person who is stuck in old ways of thinking, old behavior, call it neurological junk. A lot of people call it head trash, whatever it may be. But a lot of times we just look at the symptoms, if you will, which is maybe some negative thinking or some, cognitive distortions, if you will, or behavioral issues. But those are symptoms of the problem. And the problem is the belief you have that, and this is hard for especially people who are high performers. They stay so much in their intellect and in their head that it's hard for them to, really see what's going on. And a lot of people will think to themselves, and this client in particular, well, I know that that's not true about me, but it feels true. I know that I'm not a failure, but I just feel like I am. And so this is not a cognitive process, not a thinking. You could have thought your way out of your issues, you would have by now, right? And that's why we need support from others and from other professionals. So once we took a look at that and it was bringing the subconscious conscious, well, now we can work on it. But this client didn't know that part of the reason why he was not doing things in business that would help his revenue increase was because of the way in which he was operating out of fear, which for this client led back to the feeling of being a failure, despite what he maybe intellectually knows. And so walking people through that process is really eye-opening, because these aren't conscious things. You aren't going around thinking I'm a failure or I'm afraid of success, or what if people find out that I'm really not as good as they think I am, or whatever it may be. And once all of that is brought to the forefront of the mind, then you can make conscious efforts to deal with it, almost like our own version of a virus scan, right? And then begin to operate in ways that are going to propel you forward versus keeping you in that plateau.
Mandy, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today. It's a fascinating subject, great example as well. Remind people where they can get hold of you.
You can get a hold of me at therapistmandy.com. That's all my social media handles. It has my information about executive coaching, as well as information about therapy and trauma-based EMDR therapy that I do as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on.